Hi, I'm Father Daniel Brandenburg, and I'm excited to be able to share with you some insights on my forthcoming book on the leadership of Jesus Christ. We talk about leadership in Regnum Christi so much, and I think it's important that we understand it at a deeper level. Over the last 4 years, I had the opportunity to study for a doctoral degree through Creighton University's Interdisciplinary Leadership Program, and it was so wonderful because I was able to go deeper into this core aspect of our charism, understand it in a deeper way that hopefully will help each one of you. That the insights that I'm going to share with you in this particular presentation are a precursor to what's coming out in a forthcoming book. And it started because at the end of those 4 years of study, I realized that there was a huge hole. We had talked a lot about leadership, looked at all different leadership paradigms, but not once was Jesus Christ referenced as a leader. There was no document cited from the Catechism of the Catholic Church or any magisterial document for that matter. And I realized that in much of the academic literature and much of the academic world today, there is this glaring hole of looking at the leadership of Jesus Christ with objectivity. Because objectively, when we look at Christ, we find the greatest leader who ever lived, who brought tremendous insights and graces beyond the fact of, obviously, his divinity. But simply on a human level, the leadership of Christ was extraordinary. So in this presentation, I hope to share with you some of those insights and spark a little bit of further interest for you to probe further and go deeper. My forthcoming book is entitled Leaders Yet First Followers, and very intentionally so, because many of us have had negative experiences of leaders. And here, this powerful painting from Peter Paul Rubens on the fall of the rebel angels depicts what happens when we have misguided leadership. Arguably, Satan was a great leader. He took protagonism and he wanted to do great things. And yet that pride put him in opposition to God and ended up leading to great destruction and division within creation itself. So misguided leadership is very problematic. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but I think it's important to start with that preface. Now, I'm going to cover 3 different areas here. We're going to cover, first of all, leaders and clarifying notions. Second, leadership paradigms that can be helpful for us to understand leadership at a deeper level. And third, how are we called to lead like Christ did? So first of all, the leaders and clarifying notions. There are 7 myths that sometimes are bandied about around us, and especially in the world today. The first is that leaders are born that way. Congratulations, you got a leader. This myth is prevalent in many parts of society. People think, you're born a leader because of your social economic class or because of the gifts that you're given. And this is simply not true. Certainly, there are many characteristics and traits that a person may have in their family of origin or their personal qualities, which can foster the potential for leadership, the capacity for future leadership. But leaders are not born, they're made. Secondly, there's this notion out there in our egalitarian society that everyone is a leader, everyone leads all the time. And you hear some of these ridiculous statements from authors and even researchers in a very simplistic way saying that everyone is a leader. And that's simply not true. You are a leader when you have followers. If you do not have followers, you are not a leader. You may have self-drive, you may have self-determination, you might have lots of qualities, but to be a leader is actually arduous labor. And it's not everyone is a leader. And in fact, we are not leaders, and even a person who is a leader in one realm may be a follower in another. And so, a man who is a really capable CEO in his company, when he goes home, if he doesn't obey his wife and doesn't follow her lead on certain things within the family, it's going to be problematic. So we all have to know when is the time when we lead and when is the time when we follow. The third myth that's out there is that there's only one proper way to lead. Whether it's servant leadership or if it's transformational leadership or if you got to lead with purpose and drive, whatever it is, that's simply false. The reality is there are many different ways to lead which need to be adapted to the situation and to the particular individuals that you're working with. A fourth myth, and I think this one is particularly prevalent within the Legion and Regnum Christi, is that leadership is the same as authority. We have a great reverence for authority, and rightly so, because when God designates a person to be in a position of authority, we should respect Christ in that person. And that's the whole principle of obedience within religious orders, within the context of the rich patrimony of the church. But at the same time, sometimes we can equate equivocally authority with leadership. They are not the same thing. And understanding the difference is core to what we're going to be going through in these next slides. The fifth myth that's out there is that leaders are rich. No, this is a mistaken notion. Rich people are not necessarily leaders, and people who are leaders are not necessarily rich. Leaders have followers, and as we go through, it's important to make that clarification in our minds, because if not, our work to form leaders can fall into a form of elitism, which is not from God and is not according to the gospel. We work with those who can influence others in order to be more effective in carrying out the gospel message. That does not equate with being rich. There are many people who are very simple, very poor, who are also leaders in their realm. So recognizing that is important to understanding leadership properly. The sixth myth out there is that to be a great leader, we have to read more about leadership. Just read more books. I know lots of people who have read many, many books about leadership, and they're just not good leaders. This is a total myth. It can help, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. The seventh myth is more of a personal one. This is one that we can sometimes fall into self-doubt, like, well, I'm not a leader. That's not me. I can't work with these people. I don't have what it takes. And that's simply a myth. If God has called you to be a legionary of Christ, to be a Regnum Christi member, he has given you the gifts, he's given you the charism to work with people who can influence others. So God has called you, and this is then the basis for overcoming the myth, that confidence in God and not in ourselves. And here the important element is the call. This is one of the richest elements of our spirituality. It's always been very present, that we rely not so much on ourselves, but on Christ who has called us. And this fundamental experience of the call of Jesus Christ is right at the heart of our vocation, right at the heart of our response to Jesus. Like the disciples and the apostles in the New Testament, John the Baptist, he was clearly called by the Lord to carry out and prepare the way of the Lord. Or Andrew and John, who are called, and they followers of John the Baptist, and they follow after Jesus and say, where do you live? Jesus says, come and see. They were called to follow him. Simon Peter, clearly, the Lord said to him, come and I will make you a fisher of men. Peter realized he wasn't worthy. He said, depart from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. And yet, despite that reality that he was a sinful man, that he was weak, Christ called him. And that call persisted even with his betrayals and his failures and his limitations. This gives us great confidence, because if Peter could have a continuity in that call, and we read in later in St. Paul's letters, the call of God is irrevocable. If Peter can continue in that call, so can we. Philip, who was called under the fig tree. Nathaniel, the Israelite in whom there is no guile. Each one of these men experienced something powerful. And there's, in the leadership literature, there are 5 follower types that we can identify. There are 2 poles here. We have the critical thinking, which is on the left-hand side, those who have greater critical thinking, and those who have lesser critical thinking. At the bottom is the active contribution to the organization. Those on the left, a little bit less active contribution. Those on the right, more fully contributing to the mission and purpose of the organization. On the bottom left, we have those who are passive, the sheep, the ones who just follow along, do whatever they're told, don't really think too much about things, and really aren't contributing a whole lot to the mission of the organization. Above them are those who are exercising greater critical thinking, but they're not really buying into the mission. They're alienated, kind of this eternal skeptics who call into question everything. These are not helping an organization. They can be actually quite damaging to an organization. On the right-hand side, we see the conformists. These are the happy-go-lucky people that are just cheerleaders for everything. Whatever decision comes along, don't think critically about it. Let's just go along and make everyone happy. And these can actually be very detrimental types of followers to an organization, because in situations in which there are critical needs to think clearly, they're just going along and running towards the cliff. Then you have the pragmatists who are in the middle, who just kind of analyze everything and go with the flow to see, there's the survivors who are just looking to get through everything that happens. And on the top right-hand side, we see the exemplary followers. These are the stars. These are the ones who exercise their critical thinking, aren't afraid to challenge certain decisions, but when it comes time to get together with others get on board with a decision, they'll get on board because they see that they want to contribute to the mission of the organization. And they are the greatest contributors. So what type of follower am I? Am I a follower of Jesus Christ? Am I a follower within my section, within my community, within whatever, with my local parish? Am I an exemplary follower? Or am I a follower who's causing problems, or I'm too passive, or I'm just a conformist? This is a good area for self-examination. In a really fascinating study that was conducted in the military, they noted that there's been a lot of talk, many programs about leadership, but not as much about what are the qualities of effective followers. Because for any organization to exist, you need good followers. Not everyone can lead, and certainly not everyone has the qualities to lead in certain situations. So recognizing when it's time for a certain person to rise to a leadership role and when it's my time to follow is really important. Now, this is obviously impossible without humility. But this is a purely secular standpoint looking in the military at what are the qualities of effective followers. They found 5. The first, effective followers are those who display loyalty. They're committed to the organization, they're going to help further the goals, and they're going to also provide constructive criticism. They're not just going to mindlessly go along with whatever's said, but they're going to offer us like, hey, could we do this way instead? Can achieve the objective, but maybe this would be a more effective way to do it. Or say, hey, are you sure that objective is actually a good one? Maybe we should take a closer look at that from an ethical standpoint or from a practical standpoint. But there's a loyalty that's displayed. The second quality of effective followers is that they function well in change-oriented environments. They can adapt to the situation, see what the needs are, and they're constantly attuned. They're using the noggin that God has given them to be more effective in carrying out the mission of the organization when there is change in difficult situations. The third really important aspect of, and this is also mentioned in the practical principles of the spirituality of Regnum Christi, we need to be team players. An effective follower is going to collaborate, share credit, and is dependable. Doesn't always have to be in the limelight. He knows when it's time for him to contribute, when it's time to support someone else, when it's time to praise someone else. This requires great humility. If you don't have humility, and this is actually one of the traits that you see sometimes, unfortunately, in the business world, that there's a higher degree of narcissism in people who attain CEO positions. Why is that? Oftentimes people who are narcissists are driven towards validation. They want to be in the limelight. They need that affirmation from other people. It's a lack of fundamental humility. Sometimes it can cloak itself as, a person who has great self-esteem, but that's not real self-esteem. Self-esteem itself is a very nebulous concept. What we need to do is have confidence in Christ and who he has called me to be and the mission he's called us to, but also humility to recognize that call of Christ in others and the gifts and qualities that others bring. Be a team player. The fourth quality of an effective follower is that their capacity to think independently and critically. They're not just going along to get along. They are challenging things to make things better. Lastly, they consider integrity of paramount importance. An effective follower is trustworthy, tells the truth, keeps high standards, and admits their mistakes. All of this requires, again, humility. Humility and integrity in study after study have been shown to be the fundamental and foundational quality of effective leaders. If you lack integrity, if people think that you're pulling the wool over their eyes, if they think that you are not reliable or not trustworthy, if they don't trust your intentions, if you don't follow through on what you say you're going to do, if you show up late to things, if you don't follow through on your commitments and your promises, people won't trust you and you will never become an effective leader. For that matter, you can't be an effective follower. Now, when we look at the first disciples of Jesus Christ, we find 3 traits, 3 qualities in them. In each one of them, they were living in the fullness of time. Christ came into the world in order to bring about his mission. And they have a great distinction of being able to live at a time in the fullness of time. We too have been born into the time which God has put us into because we have a specific mission that he wants us to accomplish in the world today. We too are born in the fullness of time. The second element of all of the disciples and followers of Jesus is a radical transformation. When they truly encounter Jesus, experience his love for them, This is why I love those early numbers in our statutes and in the constitutions of Legionaries of Christ, in the statutes of the consecrated women and the consecrated men. We all emphasize that moment of the encounter with Christ. That's why one of the fundamental aspects of our spirituality, living out our spirituality, we call it the encounter with Christ, that weekly meeting of Regnum Christi members where we delve into Scripture and we're seeking to know Jesus Christ more deeply so that we can respond to his love and carry out our mission in this life. That encounter with Christ occasions a radical transformation. Life is not the same before and after that encounter with Christ. It sets off a whole series of things, of shifting of our priorities, valuing what's truly important, setting our eyes on eternity, and putting Christ at the center of our lives. The third element of all of these first followers of Jesus Christ is they develop their sense of personal identity in Christ. Like St. Paul, he loved me and he gave himself for me. His whole identity revolved around that. Or look at St. John the Apostle. When he references himself in Scripture, he says, the disciple whom Jesus loved. He doesn't say the disciple who loved Jesus, but rather the disciple whom Jesus loved. The emphasis is on Jesus and the action of Jesus, which molds the entire identity of John, who sees himself as a man loved by Jesus. Does the love of Christ shape who I am? Does it form my personal identity? This is the foundation to be truly a follower of Jesus Christ, which then is the foundation for effective leadership as a Christian. Notably also, every single one of the early followers of Jesus exercised their leadership through service. Why? Because our Lord himself said, if anyone among you would be great, he must first become the servant of all. You know, at the Last Supper, when Jesus took off his garments and knelt down and washed the feet of his disciples, I've always wondered, well, why isn't the washing of the feet one of the 7 sacraments? Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me, just like he did with the Eucharist, for example, and the other sacraments. They were instituted by Christ for our salvation. Why isn't the washing of the feet one of the 7 sacraments? And it came to me once in prayer, as I was recovering from cancer, that it is present. And it's present in every single one of the sacraments, because each of the sacraments is an act of service. It's an act of self-giving to those that we serve. And so it is present as the form, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, charity is the form of all the virtues. And the charity service of washing the feet of others through the sacraments, through our service in the church, is foundational for the leadership of the first followers. Now, we're going to be developing and going into the models of leadership in this next section a little bit further on, but this is what we're going to see in each of the disciples, and I bring out a little bit further in my forthcoming book. Now, let's take a look at followers who become leaders. In my experience, if a person doesn't know how to obey, they don't know how to follow, they can never become a good leader. It's foundational. And we become great leaders inasmuch as we reflect Jesus Christ, as we live in persona Christi. This is the whole mission of a priest, is not to glorify himself, not to lord it over others, but to be at the service of others, to draw others into the love of Jesus. Inasmuch as we reflect Jesus Christ in his life, in his way of life, in his virtues, we can become leaders. Secondly, there's a foundational book of really phenomenal insights, one by Chris Lowney called Heroic Leadership. And he talks about the whole leadership pipeline that the Jesuits and St. Ignatius of Loyola formed from the early years, and how it formed this whole machine for forming leaders. In that, he talks about the virtues, the adaptability, the getting to know one's own qualities, and also your own limitations through examination of conscience, in order to be able to adapt to different circumstances and come out on top, leading forward the organization. Very insightful book that I highly recommend. In it, he says in page 45, Loyola's core appeal was not his own leadership traits, it was his ability to identify and unlock others' latent leadership potential. This is so important for leaders because none of us has all of the necessary qualities in every moment. If we don't surround ourselves with people who complement our skill set, who maybe see things in a different way, we will be ineffective as leaders. The greatest leaders know how to form a team of people who complement and fill in for their own gaps, and then carry out the mission of the organization working together. A third foundational element, if we're to become leaders, is a virtuous life and pure motives. In the leadership literature, there's a whole new area of research which is cutting edge, but it's really not cutting edge at all, because it's going back to Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas and the rich patrimony of the church, talking about virtuous leadership. How leadership, when it's not pursued out of virtue, it's just pursued out of a desire for authority, or desire to lord it over others, for desire to have an impact, is oftentimes driven by selfish motives. And because of that, it becomes very problematic and can delve into bad leadership or toxic leadership very quickly. Virtuous leadership, living for pure motives, doing it out of service for others, leads to becoming great leaders. Another element that we have within the Legion and Regnum Christi, which is a tremendous gift, is our prayer life. Prayer, taking the time to reflect, to stay connected with the Lord, united with God in prayer, is one of the great aspects that helps enhance leadership qualities. Why? Because leaders who are not self-aware, and they're not aware of a power greater than themselves, can fall into narcissism very quickly. They can fall into self-serving manipulation of other people. They can get sidetracked by side goals which are not important, or are even negative and detrimental for the people who are following. Prayer and recognizing the power of God and His grace in our lives helps us to stay well balanced. Care for people is also really crucial for leaders. In order to be a leader, you have to have followers. You won't have followers if you don't treat people well. So caring for people and having good emotional intelligence, attentiveness to the needs of others, is foundational for leadership. Standing apart and above is also important to become a leader. You have to become a reference point. We can't be a reference point in everything because we're human. We're limited. Christ has all of the qualities, but we as individuals don't. So we can specialize, and that's where we know in this particular area I can lead, and in another area I may not be competent, and I need to have the humility to step back. And one of the great traits, one of the greatest blessings that we have within the Legion of Regnum Christi historically, is our superb formation, a doctrinal clarity, a great openness and flexibility, understanding situations, adapting to the reality. All these core elements of our formation over the years have given us a basis for developing tremendous leadership capacity. Now, I want to take a little brief moment. I want you to reflect a little bit. 2 steps. First, write down your definition of leadership. What's a leader? What is leadership? You may find that it's a little bit like St. Augustine said about time. If you don't ask me, I know exactly what it is. But as soon as I have to put it down in words, we struggle to find what is leadership. So take a few moments now. You can pause this video and take the time you need. The second question is, I want you to name the 2 best leaders that you have known. This will illustrate for you if your definition of leadership is on or off. But name the 2 people who have that you see as the best leaders that you have ever known. And take a little bit of time. You can pause this video if necessary. So let's go into clarifying this notion of leading. What does it mean? We have here on the screen this picture of a man leading a horse. I just came back from a mission trip where we had a donkey, and the guide who was on the trail with us was leading the donkey, and he had to pull it along sometimes, and he had to walk ahead of it because the donkey didn't want to go. Horses sometimes don't want to go. What does it mean to lead? Well, we can learn a lot about leadership from horses. There's a gentleman named, I think, Patrick Benjamin, who was they call the horse whisperer, who has a book called The Horse Whisperer with phenomenal insights on leading that we can learn from animals. You know, horses, as with many other animals, they need to trust you. They need rest and food, otherwise they get cranky and they don't want to follow, they don't want to lead, or don't want to follow the leader. Horses have different personalities, and you got to get to know them. They have a natural pecking order. If you don't respect that, the horses themselves will get antsy. And oftentimes you need to walk before them. You have to show the way. That's what it means to lead. It means to go before. We can also learn a lot about great leadership from great teams and athletes. I in team, we've all heard that. In a great leader within a team knows how to bring out the best of their fellow players or the people that they are coaching. In sports as well, we learn about the importance of faith, passion, trusting in each other, relentless drive, all those qualities that we admire in great athletes. We can also learn some things about leadership from great politicians and generals throughout the world, history of the world. One of my favorite is Dwight D. Eisenhower, who came to lead the Allied forces as Supreme Commander during World War II. Later on became President of the United States. And in a long forgotten essay that he wrote, I believe in 1954 or 1956, about leadership, he said that leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it. Now, this is a really insightful definition, which I think has a basis and some plausibility, although there are a couple of elements that may be missing. Now, before we go into my definition of leadership, and I'd love to hear feedback from all of you about what your definition is, I think we also have to look at why is leadership important? Because where the head goes, the body follows. Whether it's in organisms, individuals, organizations, society, culture, and civilization, where the head goes, the body follows. Even with certain attempts to deny the importance of leaders, we don't really need leaders to come to a horizontal organization. All the studies have shown that those attempts to say that leadership is not important are actually fallacious. Leadership is important and it has a significant impact. I found it very, very clearly in my own leadership literature research when in my doctoral dissertation on the correlation between the leadership styles of Catholic bishops and the health of their diocese. More effective bishops, or they had a healthier situation in their diocese. Secondly, leadership impacts personal well-being and organizational performance. All of us have experienced both good leadership and bad leadership, whether it's in a section, a community, in a business, in a job that I've had, in a sports team. We've all seen the difference that a good leader makes for my personal well-being, but also for achieving the goals of the organization. But I think most importantly for us, it is core to our character within the Legion of Regnum Christi. Number 4 of the Constitutions of Legionary of Christ, which says our mission is to form apostles, Christian leaders at the service of the church and of society. And Christus Vita Vestra, there are a whole slew of numbers that reference the importance of leadership and of forming leaders and of forming ourselves as leaders. And in the statutes, we have multiple references as well to the importance of leadership, both in the preamble, number 5.3, number 8, number 33, and in number 17.4 of the Reglamento, or the Rule of Life for Regnum Christi members. These are all core source documents referring to the importance of leadership and the importance to our mission of forming leadership in other people. Number 8 of the statutes is particularly poignant. It says, to fulfill our mission, we seek to make present the mystery of Christ, who goes out to people, reveals the love of his heart to them, gathers them together and forms them as apostles and Christian leaders, sends them out, and accompanies them as they collaborate in the evangelization of people and of society. And lastly, we have that letter of Father John Connor of April 15th of 2023, talking about this importance of leadership and emphasizing how we are called to fulfill this in our mission today. This then brings me to my own definition of leadership. After 4 years of doctoral studies and lots of reflection and prayer, what is leadership? Haslam, Riker, and Plateau wrote a book called The New Psychology of Leadership. It's a fascinating book, not an easy read, but one of those that I really enjoyed during my leadership studies. And they say that leadership is not a matter of chance. It's not a matter of fate. It's not something one is born to. It's something in which leaders themselves can be active agents by knowing how to configure their own behaviors in relation to group identities. We'll unpack that a little bit more later on, but the key point here is that leadership is not by happenstance. It can be very intentional that we develop within ourselves the mindset, the qualities, the capabilities in order to lead others, to influence others. Hence, my definition of leadership is the art of aligning people and accomplishing the good we want. Every word there is significant. I'll unpack that in a little bit, but I want to bring out 3 areas of research and 3 areas I think that are influence on our capacity to live out this leadership. First is the traits. Kirkpatrick and Locke, in a seminal study back in 1991, identified 6 traits that were common to effective leaders: drive, leadership motivation, honesty and integrity, self-confidence, cognitive ability, and knowledge of the business. We'll come back to that a little bit later. I think that's one key element. What are the baseline traits that we have within our personality? Some of these can be shaped, some of them are innate, some of them come to us as a fruit of a solid family of origin. But there are elements that we can all develop. They're traits we can develop. Secondly, there are the practices. Many of you are probably familiar with the work that was done by Kouzes and Posner on their 5 leadership practices. They talk about modeling the way, inspiring a shared vision, challenging the process, enabling others to act, and encouraging the heart. We've even done some leadership training within Regnum Christi and the leadership teams on the territorial level on putting into place these practices in our dealings with other people. But on a third level, there's an identity aspect that we have not talked about a whole lot within the Legion of Regnum Christi, but I think has tremendous impact. And this is from the book that I already mentioned, The New Psychology of Leadership. And there are 4 rules for effective leadership that they denote. 1, an effective leader has to be recognized as one of us. Second, he or she has to be seen as a champion for us or of us. That is, they're moving forward what is good for us. Third, they have to be an entrepreneur of identity. That is, they are someone who is working to bring about a sense of us, that we are working together towards this goal. There's a common mission and vision that we are working together to accomplish. And fourthly and lastly, this effective leader has to be an embedder of identity. That is, they build traditions and symbology and reminders that could be things like a feast day or pictures that are up in a section building, or T-shirts that we wear. All these little symbols that help remind us of who we are and keep us on track. All 4 of these elements are important for establishing the identity of leadership. So then these traits, practices, and identities all coalesce in the work of an effective leader. Now, the art of leadership is really important to look at as well. Wanting to lead and believing you can lead are only the departure points on the path to leadership. Leadership is an art, a performing art. And in the art of leadership, the artist's instrument is self. The mastery of the art of leadership comes with the mastery of self. Ultimately, leadership development is a process of self-development, end quote. Now, this is particularly important and I think very insightful for us within the Legion of Regnum Christi, because we talk about formation. We talk about becoming the new man or new woman in Christ. And in as much as we do that, we are enhancing our capacity to lead. To follow Christ, to be a follower of Jesus, means that we are putting the foundations for effective leadership. Now, let's go through each one of those elements of my definition of leadership. It's an art. That is, it's not a perfect science. An art is something that you perfect with time. You become a maestro with time. You become a virtuoso once you've practiced, once you've exercised the art. If I'm a potter, and the first time I sit down at the potter's wheel and I'm spinning that clay around, the clay tends to go off, spinning off the potter's wheel, and I come up with this nasty clump that barely looks like a pot. But when you watch an artist at the potter's wheel who shapes that clay and brings it into form, it is a beautiful thing. And an effective leader, as a great communicator, as attentive to the needs of people, reading the signs of the times, exercising that adaptability to the circumstances, it is an art that brings together many different elements and expertise over time. And it's an art of aligning people. It's a people-oriented skill. If you're good at working with clay, it doesn't mean that translates into being effective as a leader of people. Effective leadership is the art of guiding people. And in order to do that, you have to show love, consideration, attentiveness, good listening skills. All of that's fundamental for being able to work with people and aligning them. That is, it's not just making people happy. It's not just accompanying people in the negative sense of going along to get along or just being with people. No, it's aligning people towards a mission, towards a goal, without taking away anyone's freedom or manipulating, but saying together, what do we want to accomplish? It's the art of attaining the we, the us. The next element of the definition is accomplishing. Someone who simply talks about things or gets people excited about things but doesn't get anything done, doesn't accomplish anything, couldn't really be considered an effective leader. We've all met people who are all talk and no show. Ultimately, that undermines trust, and it undermines the effectiveness of anyone who's in a leadership position who doesn't deliver with any type of results. This next element is the good, accomplishing the good. This is so important because at times in history and in the academic reflection, it talked about, well, was Hitler or Stalin a leader? They were really effective at aligning people. They accomplished some really remarkable stuff, remarkably evil stuff. So it's necessary to put this ethical dimension into leadership. It's the good. Now, we could have all types of conversations about what entails that which is good. That's for a different place, but that's the whole realm of ethics, of moral philosophy, of moral theology, which contribute great insights under understanding what truly is good and what's not. And lastly, the art of leadership entails what we want. That it's something that is not forced upon us. It's not something that we've been hoodwinked into. It's something that we, as a group, as a body of people, have agreed that this is something that we want to accomplish. We want it to happen. And this then is the capstone, if you will, of the art of leadership. That art of aligning people and accomplishing the good we want. There are a few last elements that I want to clarify, clarifying notions about leadership. First of all, we are talking about a leader. A leader is a human being. If you noticed, and throughout this presentation, there's a shadowy image of Christ in the background because he is the quintessential leader. Now, a leader exists within a certain context, that bracket that we see on the right-hand side of the screen. If you ignore the context in which you're operating, you cannot be an effective leader. There are different times and seasons of life. There's different epochs of world history. There are different needs and sensibilities that have to be adjusted to. So a leader always exists within a specific context. Taken out of that context, read in a different context, they may be less effective or more effective as a leader. Once we've taken into account the context, then we can look at the core element of leadership. When we talk about leadership, we are essentially discussing influence. This is a very important concept. Influence is being able to move things in a certain direction. And within the realm of leadership, we're talking not about moving a computer mouse or some material objects that we line up. We're talking about people, influencing people, their people skills. This is closely followed by another concept, which is that of followership. In order for a person to lead, there have to be followers. Followership is the whole science of studying what are the qualities of followers, what are the contexts in which they follow, what's bad followership. And you'll notice that these two circles overlap because there are followers who are not really influenced, that they're outside the realm of influence of a leader. And there are those that then fall within the realm of influence of that leader. We'll have different names for these, which will come along later on. A third key element to understand its relationship with leadership is power. Power is that ability to get things done, to make things happen. This is then closely related to authority. Authority is to be designated, to be entrusted with a certain task or certain power. Now, we notice that power and authority are not the same, but they do overlap in the context of the leader. Power and influence are not the same, but they overlap in part. Authority and influence are not the same, but they overlap in part. And these four concepts of power, authority, influence, and followership can be muddled in our minds. And so that's why I created this diagram to see what is the correlation between them. How do they relate to one another? And the easiest way to do that is to show some different names in kind of a colloquial way that help us to understand the difference between these four areas and where they overlap. Those followers who are not really influenced by the leader are sheep. They're passive. They're going along because just everyone else is going along. They're not really influenced so much by the leader. They're influenced more by the crowd, by the flock. Those who are followers who are more active, as we saw in the earlier diagram with those exemplary followers, the stars, these are your disciples. They're the ones who are following the leader because they really believe in what he's doing. They're bought into the mission. And so we have this difference between the active and the passive followers. In the realm of influence, those who are not following the leader, we have manipulators. These are people who they're not bought into following the leader. They're kind of doing their own thing, either because of pride or because of intellectual reserve or some other motive. But they're trying to maybe manipulate other people, get things there to go their way. But they're not docile. They're not open to following a leader. You have in the realm of power, where power and influence overlap, you have influence. A rebel is someone who is challenging the leader and not willing to follow and to acknowledge the authority of the leader. They're doing their own thing. And they are exercising power over other people. They're getting things done. Now, there are times in history where rebels then become the leaders once they assume that mantle of authority. We have on the lower level, the boss. These are the ones who have authority and influence, but they really lack power. People follow them because they're the boss, but they don't really like them. And the boss is missing an essential element for the really effective leaders, which is where we have the coalescence of power, authority, and influence. When you have someone who exercises authority, but they don't really have any influence or power, we call them a petty tyrant. And then the bully is the one who exercises power, but without influence or authority. So looking at all these colloquial names gives us hopefully a little bit better understanding of these four key elements that coalesce into an effective leader where power, authority, and influence combine. Lastly, we have the dictator who may have power and authority but lacks influence. A great example is Benito Mussolini right before he lost power. People had stopped paying attention to him. He had stopped influencing people. He still had lots of power because he had his henchmen who were carrying out his work, and he had some degree of authority because he had been designated with the authority, but he was a dictator and a petty one at that. Lastly, let's take a look, before we close off this section, let's look at some of the four sources of power and authority, because these important concepts dovetail in with our understanding of leadership. First, there can be a positional power and authority. This conveys authority, and it's rooted in delegation. Police, people who are in those type of positions. Conditional power is rooted in competency. So someone who has studied an area, is brilliant, who really knows things, they can be a reference point that people will ask, what should we do? These are typical of experts or university professors, priests who have a moral authority. And that brings us to the next level. Moral authority conveys both indirect power and authority because it's rooted in virtue and service. When you meet a person, like a Mother Teresa or St. John Paul II, they exert this energy, this power because they're a good person who clearly cares for other people and they're living a good life. The last element or area of that conveys power and authority is the creative side. This conveys a lasting direct power and authority, and it's rooted in a creator's rights. This is someone who writes a book. They have power and authority over the creative work that they have created. God, who has created creation itself, who has created us, has this lasting direct authority and power over us because he is the creator. This then concludes our first section on the leaders and clarifying notions. I hope this has been helpful, and stay tuned for the second installment where we go into leadership paradigms and then leading like Christ. God bless you.